The money market is where the nominal interest rate is determined. Financial institutions interact with each other in order to supply money to individuals and businesses throughout the economy that demand it. When Christina visits the bank in Econoland, she puts some additional money into her savings account. She wonders what's happening with the interest rate on her savings account because that will affect how much money she earns this year. Later on, she happens to read a news story on the internet saying that interest rates have gone up. Why would they have gone up? And how will this affect my savings account, she wonders. At the same time, Davis is shopping for a new car loan and will need to borrow money from a bank to buy a car. He sees the same story about interest rates rising and is wondering what caused it and how will it affect him. That's what we want to talk about now. Economists use a model called the money market model to describe how the nominal interest rate gets determined. It's based on the supply of money, the demand for money, and the factors that affect them. Let's first take a quick look at the components of this model, then we'll put them together to see what happens. The demand curve for money illustrates the quantity of money demanded at a given interest rate. I want you to notice the demand curve for money is downward sloping, which means that people want to hold less of their wealth in the form of money the higher that interest rates are on other assets such as bonds. The supply curve for money illustrates the quantity of money supplied at a given interest rate, and here's what that looks like. Notice that unlike a typical supply curve in the product market, the supply curve for money is vertical because it doesn't depend on interest rates. It depends entirely on decisions made by the central bank or the Federal Reserve in the U.S. The central bank controls the supply of money and they interact with other financial institutions. This interaction is part of the money market, and we can illustrate it by using a supply curve. When we combine the money demand and money supply curves, we can describe how the nominal interest rate is determined. In any market, equilibrium is reached when supply and demand are the same. Equilibrium in the money market takes place when the quantity of money demanded is equal to the quantity supplied. Another way to say this is the quantity of money people are actually holding is equal to the quantity of money they want to hold. As you can see, the equilibrium point is at the intersection of supply and demand at M1 and R1. This is the money market in equilibrium. Now that we have a model to work with, we can begin to visualize what happens when money demand increases or decreases, or when the money supply is increased or decreased by the Federal Reserve. Let's look first at an example of changes in money demand. Suppose that Econoland is doing very well, and real GDP increases this year by 5%. Businesses are flourishing and more consumers are at the mall. Everything is happy and prosperous in Econoland. A higher economic output leads to higher incomes. Higher incomes mean that people choose to hold more of their wealth in the form of money. So this leads to an increase in the demand for money. As you can see here, when money demand increases, the demand curve for money shifts to the right, which changes the equilibrium in the money market. What happens to the nominal interest rate? It rises from R1 to R2. Likewise, when prices in Econoland rise by 10%, the demand for money increases because it now takes 10% more money to buy the same basket of goods and services. Again, when money demand increases, the demand curve for money shifts to the right, which changes the equilibrium in the money market. The nominal interest rate rises from R1 to R2. This is how we illustrate an increase in money demand. Now let's talk about the money supply. The Federal Reserve controls the supply of money. Since the quantity of money supplied affects the interest rate, and they control the supply, that means effectively the central bank controls the nominal interest rate in the money market. For example, when the Fed increases the money supply, it buys U.S. government bonds and pays with cash. Economists illustrate this as a rightward shift of the money supply curve, as you can see here. When the money supply increases, the money market reaches a new equilibrium at a lower interest rate. We're shifting the equilibrium interest rate from R1 to R2. One more thing that's important to understand. In the United States, the money market is otherwise known as the federal funds market, and the nominal interest rate is otherwise known as the federal funds rate, because it's the interest rate that short-term lending takes place in the federal funds market. It's the key benchmark rate for the banking system because other interest rates are based on it. For example, the interest rates paid on savings accounts and CDs are based on this. In Econoland, the interest rate on Christina's savings account will closely follow the federal funds rate. Federal funds are the deposits that commercial banks hold as part of their reserves. When one bank needs reserves, they borrow from another bank overnight. The interest rate they pay to the other bank is the federal funds rate. Other long-term rates, like the rate on Davis's car loan and rates on mortgage loans, are higher, but they are built on top of this short-term rate. That means that when interest rates rise, savings accounts pay more, and most likely, car loans and mortgages will also charge higher interest rates. For Christina, who has money in the savings account, a higher federal funds rate is great news. It means that her savings account rate is also going to rise, and she's going to earn a larger return on her savings this year. Davis, on the other hand, is shopping for a new car loan, and when interest rates rise, he will likely be paying a higher rate for the same car. Now that you have a better understanding of how the money market works, I want you to try some practice problems.